dynamic. Yeah, it's the big wallpaper. Pretty cool.
Got one of Delicate Arch National Park.
Okay.
That's a cool one.
Where was it?
Arches National Park.
Oh, that's beautiful.
What was that again?
Pardon?
What was that again?
Arches National Park in Moab, Utah.
Arches?
Kind of
Really
weird
cool
question.
place.
Does anyone have a bottle of water they wouldn't mind giving up? I went and looked, and it's like, I'm going to be dying by the end of this talk.
I'll go get you a cup of water for them.
They were all out.
Well, there was a water fountain and there was ice.
Oh,
That's what I did.
Man, you got gratitude. It's not worth much, I guess.
You can sit through your session.
Sounds more interesting. You look like it's playing Russian. All right.
Where do you work at? Oh, is there one?
Can't get on the internet. We'll wait for my friend to get back and then we'll start.
So where do you work at?
For the National Cinema.
National who?
National Cinema.
Oh, okay, cool.
Everyone will have to sign a release form because we're broadcasting live on the internet right now.
Cool.
We really are. We have a... Thanks for volunteering. What's your name?
Rosa.
Rosa volunteered to video. Is anyone watching?
Not right now.
No one's watching? It says 0 people?
That's correct.
Oh, that's kind of depressing. What's that?
John Chatterland.
We don't want to do that. Not a
I know they're taking the ice also, so.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much.
One's just entered.
Oh, exciting. Here, you get a knowledge lake pen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. When you're on the internet, you got more of an audience of one, right?
Hey, look at this. Man, this is a big audience. We got about what, like
Oh, you logged off.
50?
Pressure's on.
35 people-ish. It's pretty good. Welcome, everyone. This is SharePoint 2010 workflow. I'm assuming you haven't left yet. If you're looking at this slide, you're in the right room. Thank you all for joining me. Just to real quick, give a quick introduction. My name is Todd Kidda. I am a developer at Knowledge Lake. Knowledge Lake, I don't know, how many people have heard of Knowledge Lake? By the way, this is not a session for Knowledge Lake. I'm here to talk about workflow. I'm not here to hawk any goods. But Knowledge Lake does rock. I like working there. We have some great products for document imaging on top of the Knowledge Lake platform. But I'm not a sales guy. I'm a developer. So I've been working with SharePoint since 2004. I'm more on the development side. I do some, I know how to do the admin type stuff, but it's not my forte. It's not what I enjoy. I enjoy architecting solutions, writing code, getting my hands dirty. I worked on I wrote a workflow book for Rocks several years ago on the workflow foundation in .NET 3, and I'm currently working on a book also for Rocks, which will cover workflow, and among other aspects of SharePoint ECM. And as I mentioned, I'm a developer at in St. Louis. So today, this is going to be kind of soup to nuts. A soup to nuts session in SharePoint 2010. So I'm going to talk about, the entire continuum of workflow, starting from out of the box, all the Visual Studio, when you might want to use each one, what does each one do for me, what are the capabilities, what's due in 2010. So if I get an idea, just by hands, how many people in here are developers? Okay, about 10%. How many people in here are end users? Okay, how many people are admins? You got a good mix. Okay. So this is going to kind of be a potpourri session. I am going to show code. I'm going to show, there's some slides. I'm going to try and keep the slides light, a lot of talking and a lot of getting in and playing around. I don't have any necessarily demos. Rather than doing that, I'm going to actually get in and just show you how to start from scratch and build a new workflow and show you the features and tools. So hopefully that's agreeable. If anyone gets really angry, you can throw something at me. And as far as like interaction, feel free to ask questions, raise your hand, throw something at me. Don't worry about interrupting me. So feel free to ask questions now or at the end, whatever. So we're going to talk Box, Visio, SharePoint Designer, Visual Studio, amongst other big picture topics. As far as workflow concepts, I guess how many people have worked with workflow in SharePoint 2007 or 2010? So I guess probably half. So workflows are pieces of business logic that are made up of activities. Activities are the Legos of workflows. You have without these activities, workflows are essentially pretty useless. There are out-of-the-box activities with SharePoint Workflow and the custom activities. There are things like basic control flow, if, then, else, while loops, things to go out and do specific things, create a new customer, read customer information, create a new task, things like that. The activities, again, are really what piece together in a server are what makes the workflow worth anything. In Workflow Foundation, which is what SharePoint Workflow is built on, in SharePoint 2010, Workflow is still built on the .NET 3.5 style of workflow. .NET 4, the workflow in .NET 4 was completely rewritten from the ground up. So they had version 3 and 3.5 of Workflow, and then Workflow 4 was a complete rewrite. That's not what's in SharePoint. So people were kind of confused and a little concerned about that, because now there's this whole other version of Workflow that's out there in .NET that SharePoint does not use. So that is something to consider when approaching this platform. Excuse me. There are two modes in SharePoint Workflow. Sequential, which is generally what you would think about as far as drawing out a process flow diagram, from top to bottom, start to finish. You go here, then here, then here, then here. Done. State machine is somewhat, has some similar aspects in that it uses activities and there's a certain order of flow, but you can go back and bounce back and forth. Like if you have an order process that can go to different states, order open, order closed, order under review, it can bounce back and forth depending on review cycles. That would be a better workflow mode to choose to develop your solution in. Workflows are all about human interaction. SharePoint does this human through mainly through tasks. So the assigning of tasks to people through workflow processes. People get emails, their tasks show up in the SharePoint UI. It's all about human interaction. You can do workflows that are machine-to-machine interaction. You can even do this with SharePoint, but generally SharePoint workflows are all about human interaction. And workflows are inherently long-running and stateful, meaning that, let's say you have a vacation request approval workflow. You have an info path form, and you want to run workflows against that where people are requesting time off. That workflow might be running for weeks at a time. So inherently, you don't want to leave. Most traditional applications are, in memory. The application state is in memory. The machine crashes, that state is lost. Workflows are inherently long-running and stateful. Therefore, they have a persistence mechanism. So if we're waiting for a response, the workflow state can persist itself to a SQL database, which would be the content database in the case of SharePoint, and come back up later for any interaction that is required. This is the workflow continuum, and the arrow doesn't really mean, the arrow generally means, in a general sense, complexity and capability, not necessarily you start there and then you go there. If you're developing a workflow, I mean, this could be your endpoint right here if that meets your needs. So you start with out-of-the-box workflows. There are several workflows which we'll discuss in a moment that ship with SharePoint 2010. Yes, sir.
If you use Visual Studio, can you then use .NET 4 workflow?
No, it's still .NET 3.5.
Okay.
Yep, it's all, everything, SharePoint 10 doesn't know anything about .NET 4, period, even outside of the concept of workflow. So, yep, it's all .NET 3.5.
So within Visual Studio, when you're to modify a SharePoint workflow, it's just within that context of 3.5?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's right. So there's several out-of-the-box workflows. New in 2010 is the capability to design workflows in Visio. As we'll discuss, there are some limitations there. And as you might imagine, Visio is geared towards more end users, not necessarily developers. It's a nice tool, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of this tool and its capabilities, but it is a somewhat more limited designer tool. SharePoint Designer, on the other hand, is in my opinion, a very exciting improvement in SharePoint 2010 workflow. SharePoint 2007, I would always have a hard time recommending to clients that this was a enterprise solution. There was no application lifecycle management. You couldn't version these things. You couldn't deploy these things from development to staging to production. You couldn't reuse these workflows. It was very, 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 and it was all no code. It still is no code in the sense that when you're designing the workflow, you can't write any code. You can develop custom activities as you could in 2007, but we'll get into some of the great improvements in SharePoint Designer workflow, and I'll show you how to go through the process of creating a workflow. And then if SharePoint Designer does not meet your needs, there's Visual Studio. So Visual Studio provides the most power, but it also provides the most city, because you obviously now have to be a developer. You have to go through anything with writing code involves testing and bugs get in there and all fun things. So Visual Studio provides the most power, but also provides the most complexity with regards to workflow. So as far as now specific concepts in SharePoint workflow, in 2010 there are 2 scopes at which you can run workflows. New to the site workflow. Previously, you could only run workflows against list items. So you'd have, a library full of resumes or a library full of twos that had workflows running against them, and one item could only have one type of workflow running against it, one of a type of workflow running against it at any given time, and that was it. So you always had to have a workflow related to an item. So a lot of times what people would do if they have a solution that required or that didn't really necessitate a list item, they would have a dummy list item they would kind of fake it. But now in 2010, you don't require that. Flow just runs in the context of a site. It's either kicked off programmatically or through some kind of UI provided by your code. But it doesn't have to be run against a specific list item in 2010. So that's a good, nice improvement. The phases of workflow are association. One, when I'm taking a workflow definition that I created, let's say my PO process that I created in Visual Studio or SharePoint Designer, and I'm then associating that to either a site, library, or a content type. Workflows can be associated to not only to libraries, but also to content types. So in a site collection, a workflow kickoff whenever a new document of content type X is created anywhere in my site collection. But my association is where I can come in and provide global configuration for that association, and I'm associating it to a library, content type, or a site. Initiation is when the workflow is. So I also have the opportunity to provide information to the workflow at that point. If this is an approval workflow, I can provide a list of approvers, maybe some information about how I want the approval cycle to be, what I want to happen if a document is rejected along the way, and then execution is obviously when the workflow is executing, people are completing tasks and interacting with the item or site in question. So new in 2010, kind of more broadly, the tooling is a really huge story here, especially as related to, just across all 3 of these. First of all, Visio is new to the SharePoint Designer has some huge improvements we're going to see in a minute, and Visual Studio has massive improvements for developers. Site workflows are new, and as I mentioned, we're going to show these specifically and talk about what's new. So out of the box, these are pretty much very similar to what was available in 2007. most popular, I think, of the top, probably from the bottom